When I moved to the countryside, I thought I was leaving danger and stress behind, that I was swapping the guns and knives of the inner city for tall trees and wide open spaces. Little did I know that the small town I moved to was far more dangerous than any inner city. Rakesheath is a town under siege, not from anything as pedestrian as gangs or drugs. Rakesheath is under threat from the surrounding forest. But there are no large predators, no poisonous snakes or insects. The worst the wildlife has to offer is a bee sting. It's the forest itself that holds Rakesheath hostage. It's the trees. It was summer when I moved, and the town was beautiful. Small and nestled in the depths of a forest, it was like something out of a fairy tale. I bought a little house right on the edge of town. My property's border was part of the town's border, and I was utterly thrilled as this meant that my garden backed onto the forest. I imagined leaving out feeders to encourage the wildlife, deer, birds, foxes. I even bought a new camera to capture all of my would-be visitors. The surrounding forest was so abundant in plant life that I was really surprised when I first walked through the town and noticed that throughout there was nothing more than grass in a few select areas and some gardens. There were no flowers, no pot plants, no trees or bushes. I expected a place with this much natural beauty to take full advantage and deck the streets out in seasonal blooms. But with all the stress and upheaval of moving, it wasn't something I gave much thought to. The third day after moving in, I noticed the rocks. They were placed all around my property's border, each one an equal distance from those on either side. They seemed unremarkable at first, but upon closer inspection I noticed that they were covered in pale marks. Being something of a history nerd, I almost immediately noticed the similarity between these marks and Nordic runes. At first I thought they were just a decorative way to mark the boundary of my property, sort of a rustic wall, as it were. But when I went to shift one of them, my neighbour, who happened to be passing by with his elderly mother, let out a sound of utter disgust. "Never touch the rocks!" I let go of the boulder, startled by his exclamation. They'll keep you safe, dear," his elderly mother said softly. Stepping forward, her thin-skinned hand touched my cheek. She made a show of looking around before stage whispering to me. "They keep the trees at bay." "Okay," I said, unsure how else to respond. "Promise me now." The elderly lady smiled at me, her voice soft but firm. "You won't move the rocks." My neighbour coughed, taking my attention from his mother. "It's in the residence agreement," he muttered. "No bins out overnight, no trees in the garden, no painting the house garish colours, and no moving the boundary rocks. Ever." "Oh, shit." I rubbed my hands on my jeans. "Sorry, I guess I need to give the agreement another go over." In all honesty, I hadn't read the damn thing. The stupid agreement was 8,000 words long, filled with tedious bylaws and pedantic rules. But seeing as I wasn't about to risk prosecution just to move some rocks, my neighbour settled down and continued on his walk. Dismissing the elderly lady's words as possible dementia, I didn't give her strange warning any more thought. But as the days ticked over and the boxes in my house slowly depleted as I unpacked, I started noticing some strange things about my new town, and in particular its trees. Walking through the centre of town on the weekend, finally taking a break from unpacking, I noticed a crowd had gathered. I assumed from the body language that something had gone wrong, and maybe an elderly relative had had a fall or possibly a car accident. Peering into the crowd, I saw it was nothing like that. No one was hurt, thankfully. The focus of the crowd was a tree. A great tall thing. It must have been there for years, I assumed. But the murmurings of the crowd disagreed. They talked about the tree like it was new, asking questions. How had it gotten through the boundary? Where were the tree surgeons? Why hadn't they cut it down before it hurt someone? It was then I noticed that while the crowd had gathered around the tree, everyone was keeping their distance. No one was close enough to touch it. I turned away, unsettled by the attitude. They were treating this tree the way I'd expect people to react to a bear that had wandered into the town, with fascination, but also a fear that it was going to attack at any moment. It was the next day when I saw the posters. A little boy had gone missing, vanished without a trace. No one seemed to be surprised or overly interested in looking for him. When I tried to ask why, people just shook their heads and said nothing, or they spat at the ground and cursed the trees. The second strange occurrence was when I ordered the sign. It was cute, probably a little too cute really, but it made me smile. It was my house number, surrounded by painted vines, and underneath that, flowers spelt out the word welcome. I decided to put it up by the mailbox that sat on the edge of the property, nearest the forest. I had no fence thanks to the boulders, so I decided I would nail it to a tree that had grown up close to the mailbox, just beyond my property's boundary. All was well until I hit the first nail into the tree and the damn thing started to bleed. At first I thought it was sap, but the consistency and the smell was all wrong. On the third strike of the hammer, the blood splattered on my face, and the taste of iron and salt left no room for doubt in my mind. I tried to stop the feeling of panic, but before I had really decided what to do, I had gone into the garage and retrieved my chainsaw. Something primal and instinctive in me was screaming. The bleeding tree had to go. By the time I cut the offending tree down, I looked like an axe murderer. The blood had soaked through my clothes to my skin. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the chainsaw twice, trying to cut the tree into segments to burn. It took 3 attempts with matches, lighters, and lighter fluid, but I soon learned that this wood would not burn. So I threw the segments into the forest. I put my ruined clothes in the bin and enclosed myself in the shower for 2 hours. I did not sleep that night. The third strange occurrence was when I realized that the trees moved. The tree I cut down had been standing alone when I had cut it, but the following morning there were 3 new, mature trees positioned around the stump. I denied it at first, trees don't just grow overnight. But then I realized what was happening. They weren't growing, they were moving. Each morning the trees surrounding the back and side of my property moved. Always they came closer to the house, and they were never where they were when I went to bed. I started taking pictures, confirming the truth, and later I set up recording equipment, though the ones on screen never moved. Those off camera did. It was almost as if they knew I was watching. After observing the trees for a fortnight, I decided a closer inspection was warranted. I made plans to venture out into the woods. But the morning when I stepped out past the rocks, I immediately fell. Turning to look behind me, I saw that I tripped over something solid, cold, and foul-smelling. Leaning closer, I examined what had caused my fall. I couldn't tell what it was to start with. It was about the size of a Labrador dog, and it was the shape of a stunted sausage, covered in uneven tufts of grey fur. I kicked it away out of reflex, and the damn thing broke open, revealing bones, teeth, hooves, and a bright red sneaker, the kind a little boy might wear. It was a pellet, the kind an owl might regurgitate after digesting a mouse. My entire body turned cold, and I scrambled to my feet, fleeing back to the house, my great investigation cut short. Yesterday morning I found the remains of the tree I cut down in my garden. I don't know how it got there. Today I woke up to find my property line surrounded by trees. They were pressed right up against the boulders. One of them has its roots underneath one of the rocks. The roots look burnt where they touched the stone, but the rock has been rolled forward several feet. They're coming closer. They're coming for me.